Welcome to Shanta Marga, 100 Days Answer Writing Program under the guidance of Shantappa sir. Today we shall discuss about how to structure and write an answer. Even before it, mainly how to approach an answer. Let's understand, when you see a question, first thing we have to understand is how many marks the examiner is asked to write and within how many words limit. So this is most important while writing an answer. Today we have picked a question from UPSC optional paper with the same theme that appears in UPSC GS paper also. The theme is socio-religious movements. The examiner can ask a various other the sub-themes under the socio-religious movements like the caste system, education, women, legislation and everything. So the major theme here today we will discuss about is socio-religious movements. This question, as I told before, is picked from UPSC optional paper. Let's not run behind any of the other institution who frame their own question and try to give an answer. But let's run behind the UPSC, who is a BAP of all and who knows what his boundaries are, and trust me, he will ask a question from those boundaries itself. So firstly, let's see how to hit a question. Study the question first. To what extent did the socio-religious movements contribute to emancipation of women in 12th century? What is the meaning of emancipation? Emancipation is freeing from traditional values or freedom. Okay, first, when approaching a question, you have to identify the keywords. Keywords here is 19th century. You know in which century is asking about socio-religious movements and emancipation of women. After this, you have to evaluate how 19th century socio-religious movements have contributed in upliftment of women. So you have to write an introduction. In introduction, we have written socio-religious movement is called as Indian Renaissance. See, we are talking about Indian Renaissance here because it was a dark phase in Europe and that have been actually seen in the case of India also. At the time of it, the socio-religious situation in India was dark, with many of the traditional or conservative practices like sati, Devadasi system and others. The socio-religious movements have brought some light to society, calling it as Indian Renaissance, due to influence of Western liberal ideas, indigenous traditions and humanitarian concerns. Western liberal ideas were mainly introduced from the Britishers that actually helped for improve the status of women. So next, as he has asked how it contributed, so you have to tell what role the legislation or the personalities who involved in the upliftment of women. Abolition of sati is the major breakthrough in India's socio-religious movements, because Rajaram Mohan Roy led a campaign to abolish sati with Lord William Bentinck in 1829. Abolition of sati made a woman of freeing herself and leading the freedom and independent life. With this, we also have a promotion of widow remarriage. Widow remarriage, the main people we know was Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar, which resulted in giving a new ray of hope in women's life, and that to widowers' life. After traditionally it was mainly that Indian society made women to sit in a corner when she becomes a widow or performing a sati. But Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar and Rajaram Mohan Roy were flag bearers in the women movement. You can write the word flag bearers. Women's education, who all involved in the women's education? Brahmo Samaj and Arya Samaj, Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule. Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule are the major people who actually worked in the women's education. They had started schools, they had started the colleges, they had created the awareness about the importance of education during 19th century for a women. They, if as a women we are here, is one of the major reasons is Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule and the Aligarh movement. Aligarh movement, the minority community were encouraged for the modern education through Aligarh movement, and also establishment of schools and colleges like Beauty in Kolkata and first women colleges in India and everything. So when you are writing about, you know, questions, or when you are writing an answer, make sure that what all the legislation part first divided. You know, this is a legislation, abolition of sati was a legislation, widow remarriage, they started the institution, and the women's education, Arya Samaj, Brahmo Samaj, Jyotirao Phule, and Savitribai Phule. These are all the major institutions which were brought under the women's education. And opposition to child marriage and parda system. Child marriage actually brought opposition to child marriage actually brought well-informed decision about Indian families and children to take up the education and continue further studies. With this, as I told, it was the legislation impact like age of consent of 1891, the Sharda Act we also call. So that majorly took a turn in India's law system, from early young age to early marriage and abuses. So after approaching or writing the body, we have to see what is the conclusion is all about. Conclusion should be well balanced, and you are actually giving some of the ideas of yours, telling that this is good, how it is really good, how it led to the foundation of social and legal reforms. As I said, the Sharda Act of 1891 was the major breakthrough, where it actually went through major cases of conjugal bliss, or a woman has to give or given education and everything. So with this, the awareness raising about women's rights and dignity. However, emancipation was gradual process. It was not all a sudden change, overnight change. It was gradual process. Still there's a change happening. Still we are focusing on women's education. Still the government is, the current government, central government, state governments are promoting women's education, women's reservation, women's political participation and everything. But the struggle was started in 19th century itself. This is what you have to write an answer when you are approaching a question. Thank you.